being a kid when Who Framed Roger Rabbit came out, and I absolutely loved it, and I just couldn't get enough of it. If there was something that had Roger Rabbit's face on it, I just had to get it. And even now as a grown-up with no hair, I still can't get enough of this movie, and its magic never fails to amaze me. Today we are going to explore Roger Rabbit once again by looking into 10 more things that you didn't know about Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
I'm more interested in looking at all that junk behind him.
Previous one with 10 new things that you didn't know. So let's head down to Toontown once again as we check it out. Number 10. Cereal mascots influenced the creation of Roger Rabbit. Roger Rabbit was created by American author Gary K. Wolfe for his 1981 novel Who Censored Roger Rabbit, which, unlike the subsequent movie, was actually quite dark. I've already spoken about the novel in the previous episode, where I explained there are tons, and I mean tons, of differences between the book and movie. But here's a quick recap. In the book, Roger Rabbit is a walking, talking, living, breathing comic strip character. Yeah, comic strip character, not a movie star like in the movie, who lives in a world where humans and comic strip characters coexist. And Roger is more of a secondary character to Baby Herman, who is the true star of the comic, where Roger hires private detective Eddie Valiant to try and discover why the producers of the comic strip he stars in haven't delivered on their promise to give him his own comic strip, where Roger is murdered by way of censoring, and Eddie teams up with Roger's stunt double, because in this world, Toons can create their own stunt doubles through mental energy. The Toon stunt doubles are basically clones of the Toons who create them, and even share their memories and personalities. But the stunt doubles disintegrate in time, and yes, the book ends with Roger dying in a weird, twisted plot full of murder, revenge, and deception, in which the main villain is a genie. Yeah. Oh, and unlike the movie, which is set in the 1940s, the novel is set when it was published, in the early 80s. So where did this unique and bizarre concept come from? Well, growing up, Wolfe was a fan of comic books and science fiction stories, and before Who Censored Roger Rabbit, he had already written several books. However, one morning he was watching cartoons to help find ideas and inspirations for his next book, where he saw several breakfast cereal commercials, and was fascinated by the animated cereal mascots, mainly being Tony the Tiger and Trix Rabbit. He was fascinated that in the commercials, real live-action children were interacting with the cartoon characters, but didn't question it, but rather just going along with it, as if the advert's universe was a place where anamorphic animated cereal mascots were just a thing. This led to the creation of Roger Rabbit. He used this idea of walking, talking cartoon characters and gave it a pulp and true crimes comic twist, which created the interesting and unique world of Who Censored Roger Rabbit. And I think it's important to note that this was a crime mystery story. Who Censored Roger Rabbit wasn't designed to be a tale of fun cartoons living in the real world for kids, but rather more of a pulp crime mystery with a twist. After all, if the first edition of the book is anything to go by, the original title was Who Censored Roger Rabbit? A Mystery. Number 9. Robert Zemeckis was originally turned down as director. So it seemed that with the publication of Who Censored Roger Rabbit, that Hollywood was showing interest, particularly Walt Disney Productions. In 1981, the very year that the book came out, the president of Disney, Ron W. Miller, bought the rights to the book and greenlit a Roger Rabbit movie, hoping that the movie would be a huge hit for the company. Now, if you look at Disney movies at that time, of the late 70s and early 80s, it was a period where they were trying to release big, extravagant movies full of special effects and spectacle, but they weren't really having much success in the box office.
Shape matters, because round means is better. For one.
The writing duo of Jeffrey Prince and Peter S. Seaman were commissioned to write the script. Beforehand, they had written a screenplay for a Disney comedy called Trenchcoat in 1983. And after Who Framed Roger Rabbit, they would also co-write Doc Hollywood and the movie version of How the Grinch Stole Christmas. There was one young director who was very interested in directing Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and that was its eventual director, Robert Zemeckis. But not yet. You see, when he approached Disney to direct the movie, they turned him down, because at the time he had only directed 2 movies, those being I Wanna Hold Your Hand and Used Cars, both of which were flops. So he was basically told thanks, but no thanks. If only there was a science fiction comedy about time travel, which would go on to become one of the greatest movies of all time that Zemeckis could direct and make them change their minds. Number 8. At one stage, Roger Rabbit sounded more like Pee Wee Herman. So in the very early days of production, some test footage was put together, so the studio could get a feel of how Who Framed Roger Rabbit could be made. After all, it was a very ambitious film that'll have live-action people interacting with animated cartoons. Yes, Disney had mixed animation with live-action before several times, but Who Framed Roger Rabbit was a whole new level. Originally in the novel, Roger was described as being covered in brown fur with a white fluffy chest, but it was decided to make him a white rabbit and resemble Disney and Warner Brothers cartoons of the 1940s. However, in some of these early tests, he still wasn't quite Roger as we know him, mainly due to his big red nose. What's also fascinating about the early test footage is that Roger was voiced by none other than Pee Wee Herman himself, Paul Reubens. And he actually does a good job, and you can hear that it's the genesis for what Charles Fleischer would do with the part when he voiced the character. Also in these test scenes, Peter Renaday would play Eddie Valiant. Renaday would go on to voice Master Splinter in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon, and voice actress Lucy Taylor voiced Jessica Rabbit, who also voiced Minnie Mouse and several Simpsons characters. In some later test footage, the character Roger had started to resemble more what we finally got, although in this test footage we see a much younger Eddie Valiant, as opposed to the slightly older Bob Hoskins who would be cast, which makes me wonder if the character of Eddie was intended to be younger. Number 7. A budget decrease got the movie back on track. So for a while, the Who Framed Roger Rabbit production somewhat went dormant and faded out, and was abandoned for a few years. It was Disney's new CEO of the time, Michael Eisner, who got the movie back into production, and he contacted Steven Spielberg along with his Amblin production company to produce the movie, which would have seemed like a logical choice at the time, as Amblin had produced many successful family movies, including Gremlins, The Goonies, and Back to the Future. Spielberg got a lot of creative control over the production, and convinced other animation companies like Warner Brothers and Fleischer Studios to lend their characters for the movie, despite it being a Disney production. Deals were made provided certain conditions were met, like Bugs Bunny had to share the screen with Mickey Mouse, and Daffy Duck had to share the screen with Donald, so they'll all get equal screen time, as well as Warner Brothers Looney Tunes voice artists returning to lend their voices for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So with deals being struck, there was still a further setback, that being the budget, as Disney weren't happy with the movie's planned $50 million budget, finding it too expensive, so the budget was narrowed down to $30 million, which really got the ball rolling on the movie's production. The next big step was finding a director. Former Monty Python member Terry Gilliam was offered to direct. After all, he proved to be a visually ambitious director thanks to Time Bandits and Brazil. But he turned the offer down, finding the idea of it to be too technically complicated. He would later regret the decision, saying that he was just being lazy. So the production turned to the very director who wanted to direct the movie from the start, Robert Zemeckis, as by this stage he had already proven himself to not just be a competent director, but also an amazing director, due to directing Romancing the Stone, but more importantly, his 1985 super hit movie Back to the Future. And legendary animator Richard Williams was brought in as the animation director. And so now the ship has set sail for the Who Framed Roger Rabbit movie. By the way, I love the music at the start of that film. You know, the one that goes boom, boom, boom. Number
Dawn Power Wash has 3 cleaning boosters not found in traditional dish soaps.